Wow, you know, having a mental disease or defect, or what I like to call simplistically a broken brain, is a terrible thing. As we can see from Heather Locklear, it may be as a result of organic problems, it may be as a result of drug problems. But that led us into the previous story that Anthony got for us. That was the cop saving the suicidal man who wanted to kill himself, putting his own life in danger. And today, Brian Buckmire, who's been here with us discussing the cases of the Chicago cop cover-up case, we see cops in their bad light. But most cops are good cops like that, aren't they? You see that as your job in New York City Public Defender?
I do. So I think police officers are people. And people can be good or bad. Putting on a uniform and 6 months of training doesn't change that. Yeah.
Well, you know, I've represented both police officers and I have sued police officers. And the ones I've represented are really good guys. But in Chicago, we have been covering the shooting of Laquan McDonald, who was 17, through several trials. One of the trials you saw here on Law&Crime Network, and only here on Law&Crime Network, that is the trial of Jason Van Dyke, a police officer who was convicted of second-degree murder in that shooting. Now we're covering the trial of 3 of his cohorts. I won't say cohorts, I should say fellow brethren. That is Gaffney, Walsh, and a Detective March, who allegedly covered up the shooting, tried to make it appear that it was self-defense, okay? And so they're on trial now for 3 charges: obstruction of justice, conspiracy, official misconduct, and the theory being is that they were trying to save Jason Van Dyke's job, Jason Van Dyke's career, Jason Van Dyke's reputation, and they all lied and said Laquan McDonald was an assailant, an imminent threat, that he posed danger to these officers, that he was going to immediately kill them, and that's why Jason Van Dyke had to shoot and kill 17-year-old Laquan McDonald, who was carrying a 3-inch knife. Now, to prove these charges, as you know, everybody is innocent until proven guilty. The prosecutor has gone to great lengths. So one of the things, however, that we need to show you is, because part of the defense is that the shooting was justified in this trial, even though in the other trial it's not justified. This is a new case. It's whether these officers believed this shooting was justified, and did they take actions that put that on the record, or did they know that it was not justified, and did they take actions in violation of the law? So we're going to go listen to Jason Van Dyke right now, and let us hear what he started to say about why he shot Laquan McDonald. Well, that was Jason Van Dyke in this trial several months ago, where he emotionally told the jury that was determining his fate what he felt that night and what he says he perceived that night in order to shoot Laquan McDonald. But to bring you up to speed, if you recall and you watched this trial, he also was interviewed by his psychologist, who was going to testify later, and he told the psychologist that on the way to where Laquan McDonald was, where he was eventually killed by Van Dyke, that he was probably, he told his partner Walsh, by the way, and it's important it was Walsh because Walsh is a defendant in our case, that he would probably have to shoot and kill this kid, or shoot this kid, or words to that effect. So remember, Walsh, by the way, Brian Buckmire, that was only his second time that he had had a partner, the testimony was, in this trial, and Jason Van Dyke was his second partner for riding a night. But the reason why he's included is because he allegedly filled out these reports, right, that said that Laquan McDonald was a danger, an imminent threat, could have killed him, and yet he was behind his police car and never took out his gun. Well, took out his gun, but whatever.
Correct. So he's a named defendant in this case of the cover-up because I believe it's one document that he filled out that went towards following Van Dyke's testimony that he was in danger and the reason for discharging the gun. As we said earlier, whenever an officer has any interactions with a civilian, there are typically arrest reports, complaint reports, interaction reports, whether or not force was used, whether or not your gun was discharged, and both you and your partner will have to write them. And what the 2 officers are making sure is that that story is together. That's what the prosecution is alleging. Correct. That's what the prosecution, and the defense is alleging, obviously, that that's what they perceived, right? Correct. And therefore, there was nothing wrong with it. As a matter of fact, I was following the defense defense closings early, which we're going to get to, and I was following the prosecution's closings, which again we're going to get to. But if I'm sitting there as a judge, I've got 2 stories. What is the break? What determines which story is good? Well, I think the same break that they had in the Van Dyke case, and that's the video.
The video.
Everyone can perceive how they perceive things and what they want to perceive, but the video is the truth. And whatever perception is closest to reality, I believe, is what the judge is going to go with. The other problem with Van Dyke's testimony is he's incredibly detailed about the Laquan pushing up and trying to get up and swiping from one side up to his left arm. And you look at the video and all these details are absent.
Yes.
This is not...
Could he perceive that even though it's not true and therefore his shooting was reasonable? Could he being a police officer on the streets all the time, perceive that? Yes or no?
I say no.
Okay. All right. So we're going to continue to discuss this on the other side of the break. Let's go to the break. Stay tuned. Well, you know, that is Steve Maris talking about a very significant email because it's giving the defense, it's giving the police officers who may have access to all these emails, right, the reasoning why they can put in the reports as to why Laquan McDonald was shot, and therefore it would be a justified homicide, not a criminal act. But you know what? I can't get over the fact that Mr. Maris has a crumb on his lip over here. I don't think the judge could see it, but I could. Anyhow, I'd like to bring in my guests, Marnie Jo Snyder. Marnie, everyone knows you well. You are from Philadelphia. You are a former law clerk, which I only put that now because later on when we do Kaczynski, that's going to become important. You're a criminal defense lawyer, a great one from what I understand. Welcome to my show.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me. Section of the show. Anyhow, okay. You heard that email and you said something in my ear. What did you say?
I said, wow, they're really giving him the playbook of how to lie about this.
Wow, the playbook. Wow. Wow. Have you seen that before in cases you have?
I mean, it's just, well, I've seen what I would thought was something like that, right? Getting your story straight. I've seen where police officers are so inconsistent or so consistent that to me that was something that I could use to argue that there might have been some fabrication going on. But I've never seen a supervisor say, not to put words in your mouth, but here are the words I think you should say.
And interesting, Brian, what she's saying is that the fact that somebody's consistent makes them a liar. Usually we hear in trial that if you're consistent, you're not a liar. So when you're inconsistent, you're a liar. What say you?
Well, I think I would agree with her. It's the consistency, not within just individual trials, but with my experience, it's the consistency with different trials. So you'll hear things like, I don't recall, or we saw the suspect have it in their bag. And they have the exact language, especially at hearings when you're arguing the constitutionality of a stop or getting the statements or recovering something. Their language is almost verbatim from court cases. And that makes
them lying, yeah. And you know, one of the problems they had here is there was an independent witness, not just the videotape, which is an independent witness in of itself, but Jose Torres. He was driving his son to the hospital, and he saw the shooting. Mr. Torres came forward because when he saw the police on TV basically making up a story, he said he had to do his civic duty. Let's see how he went over. So that was Jose Torres, an independent witness, who's pretty brave coming forward, knowing, remember, Chicago Police Department has this history out there in Chicago, starting with somebody named Burge, who went to jail and then died, that everybody knew that they were putting innocent black people in jail. And so if you're a minority in Chicago, you know very much about them. But if you're not a minority and you don't know much about them, didn't this sound like a cover-up from the top down, Brian? Buckmire, didn't it sound like that indeed people were making up a story at the top of the chain of command, maybe even in the mayor's office?
I'm not sure as far as the mayor's office, but definitely from the top down covering it up. And I think public defenders from coast to coast will see it coming a mile away, where officers use language like furtive movement to justify shooting someone, or DWI stops, bloodshot, watery eyes, and redness of the face. There's just language that they all use that you start to think, why are these people using the same language over and over again? In all of my cases.
Marnie Jo Snyder, you have seen it all from both sides, right? And I heard like a little chuckle in my ear when Brian said furtive movement. I mean, there's like a little, you know, we've all heard that. That's true, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a trained use of like passive voice. The gun was on him. Strange things like that aren't describing the actions that they actually took in the correct order that they took them, which of course is so important to determine whether something was constitutional or not.
Or was illegal for our viewers, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And
right.
What's what's really sad in this case is it almost seems like it's not a cover-up. It just seems like this is how we do it when someone gets shot, and I think that's the really sad thing.
Well, that could be an institutional cover-up. So
right.
as we all know, cops always use things like exited the vehicle, right? And so some of that is it doesn't mean anything. But we hear these other languages, us as lawyers, we're telling you as viewers that means something to us. But we have to go to a break, and when we come back, we'll have more of the Chicago cop cover-up case. So that is another person at the Chicago Police Department, Nancy Pekarsky-Block, who is telling the judge, who sits as the fact finder, she's like a one-person jury, that this March report, which is so critical to the prosecution, that she actually had her name put on this March report, that it didn't have to be Detective March that put the name on the report. And the reason why this is important is because there's a report from Dora Fontaine, a police officer, where allegedly it was changed not to reflect Ms. Fontaine's views and interviews she gave Detective March. So I'd like to start with Marnie Jo Snyder. Marnie, you've been sitting here and you're saying that police officers kind of know what to do now, no matter what, to determine or to tell a fact finder if they get to a trial that they're not covering an illegal act up.
Right. Well, I kind of predicted this earlier in the week when I was on. That they would
we lost Marnie. So I'm going to ask you the same same question.
Yeah. Right here? Okay.
Same question.
So I think what they're attempting to show is that there is no collusion to create that conspiracy, that these are individuals who are doing independent investigations. There's no communicating between the two of them. She wrote her report, he wrote his report, and it's based on this interpretation.
Yeah, but if a police officer can go in and change names of report, that's not supposed to happen, is my understanding. How can that happen?
They should not be able to change the names, but for...
Or put another shield office. They call it a star in Chicago. We call it a shield in New Jersey and New York, right? How can you put another shield in? You're supposed to have your own password.
Yeah, that shouldn't be happening.
It shouldn't be happening, but it did happen, and it's a defense here. Okay, so now we're going to go to the subject matter is Dora Fontaine. She was a police officer who that night said this was not a good shoot. She was interviewed by Detective March, who, by the way, was called by the Chicago Inspector General the critical touchstone of an alleged cover-up here. And then she later found out his report had something that she didn't say, and she was angry about it. So what is that something? Let's see.